My name is Jenny. I'll never forget the day my husband, Mark, called me at 9:47 a.m. On a Thursday. His voice was unlike anything I'd heard in our 7-year marriage. It was a mix of shock and unease, the voice of a man who suddenly realized his world was about to change. He said, "Jenny, my mom got something in the mail." I simply replied that I knew. There was a long silence on the other end, and then he asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" It was then that I recounted the day that had led me to this point. It was a cold November Wednesday when I truly understood that my mother-in-law, Mrs. Thompson, saw me as nothing more than an outsider. Her family was wealthy, part of the upper-middle-class social circle in our town. Mrs. Thompson was a controlling and opinionated woman, always believing her way was the only way. Her husband, Mr. Thompson, was a quiet man who usually deferred to his wife's decisions. I'd been a part of this family for 7 years, and during that time, I'd done everything I could to fit in. I worked as a full-time graphic designer, and despite my busy schedule, I took care of our 6-year-old son, Leo, almost single-handedly because Mark often traveled for his job in sales. One evening, Mrs. Thompson gathered everyone in the living room, Mark's 2 sisters, their husbands, his cousin Jake, Jake's wife, and Mark himself. I was in the kitchen, making a tray of coffee as I'd been asked. As I approached the living room doorway, I heard Mrs. Thompson's calm voice. She said, "Should Jenny be excluded from family functions?" It was as if she'd rehearsed those words for weeks. I stood there, frozen, the tray trembling in my hands. I watched in disbelief as every single person in that room raised their hands. It was as if all the years of my efforts to be a part of this family, all the birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays I'd helped organize, meant nothing. I managed to set the tray down quietly on the side table in the hallway. Then I walked back to the kitchen and turned on the faucet, hoping the sound of the water would drown out my ragged breathing. My heart felt like it was being crushed. About 20 minutes later, Leo came into the kitchen. His big blue eyes were filled with worry. He tugged on my sleeve and said in a trembling voice, "Mom, why are they being so mean?" He'd been in the hallway and heard everything. I knelt down and hugged him tightly, fighting back the tears. At that moment, surrounded by the sound of the family chatting and laughing in the next room, I made a decision. I want to make it clear that I wasn't a nuisance daughter-in-law. When Mrs. Thompson had her back surgery, I took time off work to cook for her and drive her to her physical therapy sessions. I planned Mark's 30th birthday party, which was a huge success. I'd done all this while juggling my job and taking care of Leo. But Mrs. Thompson always found fault with me. She didn't like how I dressed Leo, thought my work was too artistic and not practical, and once told Mark in front of me that I lacked the grace a woman like her sons should marry. What she really meant was that I wouldn't change myself to fit the image of the ideal daughter-in-law she had in her head. 3 weeks before that fateful night, I'd visited a family attorney, Ms. Wilson. Mark and I had been discussing a possible separation for a few months, and I wanted to know my rights. Ms. Wilson began gathering documents, our financial records, the value of our house, and details of the $50,000 informal loan Mrs. Thompson had given us 3 years ago, which she always used to remind me of my dependence on the family but had never put in writing. Sitting on the kitchen floor with Leo in my arms that night, I texted Ms. Wilson, "Proceed." I didn't confront anyone in the living room. I put Leo to bed as if nothing had happened. The next week, as Mark had informed me, they received a letter from Ms. Wilson's law firm. The letter addressed multiple issues. First, it turned the $50,000 informal loan into a formal, legally binding agreement with a clear repayment plan, removing the emotional leverage Mrs. Thompson had used. Second, it detailed the division of our marital assets in case of a separation, including the equity in our home and Mark's 401k retirement account, which his family didn't realize I was fully aware of. Third, it mentioned the potential defamation caused by the family vote, as it could be considered coordinated effort to harm my reputation. That same afternoon, Mrs. Thompson called me. Her voice was cautious, something I'd never heard from her before. She said she hoped it was all a misunderstanding. I calmly told her there was no misunderstanding. I reminded her that I'd heard her question and seen everyone raise their hands, and that Leo had been hurt by it. Over the next few weeks, Mark and I had an honest conversation without his family around. He wasn't a bad person, he'd spent his life trying to keep his mother happy and hadn't realized the cost. We both cried as we talked about Leo and what we truly wanted in life. After the letter, his family's behavior changed. Mark's cousin Jake, who had always been aloof, sent me a message saying he hoped we could move forward. His sister, who had been the most vocal in supporting the vote, started asking about Leo's school activities. I didn't react with anger because I'd already stopped seeking their approval. That internal shift was the most powerful thing that happened. A month later, Leo asked me if we were still going to Grandma's for Christmas. I gently told him that things were changing, but I'd make sure he felt loved and safe wherever we were. Life wasn't easy after that letter. There were tough legal discussions, long nights of self-doubt, but I never once regretted that text to Ms. Wilson. I learned that silence isn't weakness, and patience isn't surrender. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is stop justifying yourself to those who won't understand and let your actions speak for themselves. They thought they could vote me out of the family, but what they didn't know was that I'd already decided to rise above them.